Hey y'all, we are climbing the labyrinth, and this is a good one. This is a good one because if you have been following things along for a while, I'll put a little bubble up here that you can watch. We've been talking about some of the struggles that have been going on within the RCA, and even some of the things happening within the RCA that many people of the more conservative mindset would go, I didn't know that was happening. So you can check some of that stuff out over here. Today, what we're going to do is I actually get some time to have a conversation with the two new leaders of the Alliance of Reformed Churches, the ARC, the denomination that's kind of being birthed from the RCA, and a lot of the churches and leaders in the RCA that have been saying, hey, let's do something together rather than just leave and go somewhere else. Like, we still feel connected to each other, so how can we do something together? And so today we're going to have a conversation with Vink and Dan Ackerman. I will get into a few of the details of asking them, who they are and where they've been, so that y'all can get to know them on an individual level first. And then we'll proceed into the questions of what is the ARC? Like a no spin, no fluff, no goofy stuff, like just straight up, what's the ARC? What's it stand for? What's it about? And why would I want to have a connection to it? Why, if we're looking towards a new denomination or stepping away from the RCA or the CRC or the PCA or any of those possibilities, what is it about the ARC that should be appealing to me, or just getting their take on it? And so we'll go through some of those things, and then we'll talk through asking them just the simple question of, hey, what are y'all hearing when you go around and talk to churches? When you go around and talk to churches, to leaders, when you have conversations with people, what are the questions that are being brought up? And I know that there will be more questions than we can get to, just because one question is probably more complex than the simple answer that it could get. And so we will look to do maybe another one of these in the future, but know that we're going to cover some questions of what's going on. Some of those things are specific towards ministers that are looking at the ARC, and some of those things are towards congregations and moving forward of what that looks like. And then we'll give you some info. First off the bat, before you go any further, I will give you a whole list of links and stuff down below as far as the ARC and their website, and maybe some emails for Tim and Dan. But no, right off the bat, we're looking at arc21.org. So arc21, like 21st century.org, and you can find a whole bunch of information. One of the things that I know that is coming out is a welcome packet, kind of a intro into the ARC for churches. And so when that comes out, I will go through that in a more in-depth look so that y'all watching can actually kind of get that taken apart and dissect some of the words and the things going on there. So without further ado, let's jump in, and we will connect here with Tim and Dan. Okay, so welcome, gents. We have an awesome opportunity this morning. Especially thank you, Tim and Dan, for orchestrating this in your schedules and finding time to help give people some information. What I want to do right away is maybe just give a little intro, so each one of you can kind of just share who you are, where you've been, what your connection is here, and then what your role is at this point, or becoming as things progress with the ARC. So whoever wants to start, you can go ahead, and maybe Dan, if you want to go.
Sure. So I'm a traveler and a journeyer. I've done some kind of wild things in my life. I quit my job when I was 25 and traveled with my wife for 6 months, hung out in Southeast Asia. In the midst of that, God caught my soul a little bit about the lost people in the world, and gradually brought me back through young life and then into ministry. I pastored a couple churches. I was the lead coach for denominational revitalization for a while for the CRC. And the last 7 years, I've been in the RCA with Zealand classes. So I kind of travel along through life. That's kind of my fun part. I got 4 kids who live around the globe, one in Alaska, one in Boston, one who was recently in Costa Rica, and one who's finishing college. So, yeah, it's a fun piece. I was talked to at this point. One of my passions is good organization and lean organization. And so when the ARC was looking for the development of an organization, we had a lot of conversations, and it was, are you going to photocopy some other book of church order, or are you going to build something new? When they said they wanted to imagine a new church for the 21st century with new structures, I was on board. So I'm the organizational leader, and that's what I'm mostly about, is building a healthy and vital organization.
Awesome. That's thoroughly important, especially given some of the if for those people watching that have the issues within the RCA, of some of those issues are more so organizational issues than they are pragmatic interrelational issues that we could handle if we had some organization that helped us do that. So that's a good thing to have on board right away. Tim, where are you at?
Yeah, love it. Thanks, Dan. Met your family. You do have a beautiful family, great family. And I'm sitting in my grandson's room here in Labyrinth, Minnesota right now. This is my hometown where I grew up playing every kind of team sport imaginable. And my wife runs a business, Next Door Photo, real estate photography over here in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. We live in Michigan, and the last 16 years been running a church planting catalytic movement across the United States. And probably some people know me from that role. I finished that March 31 and was headed into probably a business opportunity that was developing. And the Alliance of Reformed Churches said we really need leadership in the area of networking with the churches and the leaders and talking with them across the country. So to come into that as a director of spiritual leadership and outreach for the Alliance of Reformed Churches right now, that's been really fun. It's been a dynamic month of May. We just started our launch period for 18 months here. We came out of a 5-month discovery discernment period where we had leaders from across the country saying, what is the Spirit saying to the churches? And this is more of a response to the many churches that have heard that it's time to go, that they are leaving. Many are making decisions without knowing even where they're going. And that's a pretty courageous move for churches. But now that there's a positive opportunity for them to come together and go somewhere together in a new alliance of churches that can partner up, as Dan said, a great movement of the gospel for the 21st century. We want to really pick up a lot on the methodology of Jesus from the first century. There's a lot of parallels between our 2 centuries, and we have to be able to join the global South in a great move of Reformation and revival that's spreading around the globe right now. So we are actually excited about the new wineskin, the new opportunity with our churches. So I mentioned I live in Zealand, Michigan. Wife Dana, 3 grown daughters, 32, 30, and 24. 2 are married, expecting another baby here in June. Love team sports, love fishing, love eating. We travel. We do lots of things like that. But just a passion for Christ, a fierce allegiance to Jesus Christ, and it's his turn. It's his chance to lead his church right now. We want him to lead really strong. The world needs us to be salt and light like never before.
Yeah, amen to that. It sounds like a good mix between gospel driven. We still have a commission, a mandate to get out to the world, and that means sometimes our neighbors and beyond. And also coming with that is the logistical part that just kind of haphazardly roaming around doesn't always lead us in the best directions. And so I like where things are going so far. And for those of you joining in, I don't have a specific role within the ARC other than being a pastor of an RCA church that is looking that direction and having connections to these 2 leaders. So maybe a good thing to do then for one or both of you is, so give folks, what is the ARC? What, without any of the the fluff and spin that we get so often when you really get into like new denominational things. Then it's either you bash the other side or you make yourself sound so great. But what is the practicality ARC to the normal average congregant that goes, I've been in this church for a long time, I don't even know what they're talking about? Give them that response, I think, is probably a good place to start.
Yeah, the Alliance of Reformed Churches, in my mind, is a gathering of Reformed churches under an organization that networks together for ministry. They should be passionate about the gospel. They should be passionate about their relationship with Jesus Christ. They should want to passionately follow the Holy Spirit. And my big desire, and that probably harks back to Young Life days, is, one of the big claims was you got to build a bridge that's strong enough to carry the weight of truth. And you've got to build a relationship that allows you to sit with somebody who's in pain, who's in sorrow, whose life isn't quite where they want it to be, or who's rejoicing, and be able to share with them the truth of how great it is to have a relationship with Jesus Christ. And if you don't spend the time building the bridge, truth usually kind of crashes somewhere in the chasm instead of reaching to the other side. So for me, that's the kind of organization we want to build. We want to build a light organization that supports churches, local congregations doing that.
Thanks, Dan. Tim, you got anything you want to add to that?
We've got a lot of questions coming up as I've been around the country already in the month of May, and some saying, well, is this really, it's more just a congregational model that we just have to make all the decisions at the local level? I mean, how is it connected? How are we connected to other churches? And so we really do have some designed relationships with missional networks of 5 to 9 churches, collaboratives of 30 to 60 churches, but both of those serve the local church. We want them to empower and strengthen local churches. So it isn't a congregational model where every congregation just makes up their own decisions. It really is a covenantal relationship, but the target is the local church, where we bear the fruit of the Great Commission, right? Where we actually see disciples reached, baptized, and taught to obey everything Jesus commanded us. So we really want a disciple-making movement at the front lines of ministry. And so everything in the Alliance of Reformed Churches is designed to help strengthen those local churches for their maximum, development, their maximum potential in Christ. And so it's an exciting time to, reverse the flow and just really be a part of encouraging churches. We have strategies to help them with a lot broader, circle of leaders around them, fivefold equipping leaders from Ephesians 4. That's one of Jesus' ascension ministries to this day. One of the implications of the ascension of Jesus to the right hand of the Father, this authority revolution that he's bringing to the earth. And we want to be part of the ongoing work of the gospel. We want to help our churches in better ways than even they've ever been helped.
Maybe as kind of a tandem to that question is, give people so where did the ARC kind of come from? So as an alliance of Reformed churches coming together, and that could mean churches that are CRC, that could mean churches that are RCA or Presbyterian, or even just maybe, I guess, floating along out there, not sure where they're going to land, or looking at things. So what is, because for a lot of people, they go, what, this is brand new. What's the kind of trajectory that has brought this about? Might be a good question too. Maybe Dan, if you want to jump in on that one.
Sure. I think the trajectory that brought this along was a number of folks who were kind of dissatisfied with a number of things and tried to look around and say, so what's worked well? Let's be honest, denominations, whether you're a United Methodist, whether you're CRC, whether you're RCA, whether you're Presbyterian-based, all function from a model of the Presbyterian model of church, delegate up to classes, delegate up to maybe regional synod or district to national event, right? And so we started asking ourselves what worked well in those situations, but what isn't working well. I mean, all of a sudden we're in this place where we're overcoming time and space using things like Zoom. We're becoming more comfortable with that. I said to somebody else, I think we went through a technological light moment where my 90-year-old mother-in-law is capable of being on a visual call with her grandchild in Alaska. And part of that happened because because of COVID, right? People walk through a technological stream to get to there. So the question is the church going to be ready? Is it going to find a way? And I think it was opportune that this happened at that time. So some of us gathered in November, actually through Zoom. There's a truth that I've not been in the room with a couple of folks I've had extensive conversations with because of COVID during the whole time this was developing. So it developed there. It developed from some common streams of people having the same level of, hey, we got to do something new. We got to, and that's where Tim said, hey, we went through this discernment and discovery time saying, is this the time? Is this the moment? And in February, March, we all came to the conclusion it was kind of the moment. And so, there was a moment where some folks decided to form a leadership board out of that group. Some folks decided to step a little bit further back. It was a working group of volunteers. And suddenly here we are, right? I mean, they started to say, well, who's going to staff this up and how are we going to do it? And Tim and I had some conversations along with them and said, I think we're ready to do this thing. And so that's where it really arose from. It arose from some folks trying to say, what's been the good of the church? And what are the challenges that keep holding congregations kind of back a little bit from being innovative and from looking forward into what God might do in their community?
Tim, you got anything to add there?
I want to emphasize that there was a sense from around the country that churches had come to a conclusion that the time was now. And our response was, do we just let all these churches scatter? I mean, these were leaders, about a dozen leaders that represented well over half of the RCA in terms of regional synod leaders, classis leaders. It just had come together during COVID and just said, are we just going to let them scatter to the four winds? We love these churches. These are our people, I was part of those conversations. I was working with most of them in church multiplication. Again, these are diverse churches, and we're planting churches with every kind of tribe and tongue. And it was delightful relationships over 20, 30 years in many cases. And to just see churches have to kind of scatter the four winds, find their own way locally to another denomination, there was a strong sense by the Spirit that the time is now. It's time to leave. Even though these churches weren't really meeting together in any assemblies, not personally, the Spirit was saying it's time to make a move and leave the RCA, or, in some cases, the CRC. That churches are looking at similar things, and there was reasons for that, and you can, talk to these local leaders. But our response was, do we just let them scatter willy-nilly in every direction, or do we actually say that the Spirit is also saying, stay together, stay on mission together, help each other, walk together, an old African proverb that I love that just says, if you want to walk fast, walk alone. If you want to walk far, walk together. And so this is a walk together moment. This is a walk far moment. We want to build a movement of the gospel in our churches that impact generation and nations, and we want to really be doing this together. And so that was an impulse in many of the leaders that are saying, we can just find our own way, our own pathway, but the new wineskin of the Alliance of Reformed Churches is coming out of 4 or 5 different ideas that were emerging, but very loosely formed. And now that's congealing. It's coming together in a singular stream, and it's an amazing kind of flow at this point. I feel a ton of the favor and the fruitfulness of the Lord already emerging as our churches are coming together and finding each other at this moment, this common purpose.
Yeah, and I'd want to even step in and make sure we're clear that one of the interesting things that happened in February to this kind of working group that was volunteer-based, kind of some in, some out, different times, was that we kept hearing from churches saying, when are you going to do this? Because, by the way, we're scheduling a vote on such and such a day to consider our future. When are you going to do this? Because our elders, or we've tasked a team to look at our future. We're in a time of discernment about our future relationship to some sort of reformed group. And I said to Tim one time, isn't it interesting? I mean, I feel like we're being pulled along by the church, not the other way around. And when some people said, well, it seems like odd timing, you didn't wait for this or that, I'm going, yeah, but part of it was we had these churches nipping at our heels or grabbing the line and yanking us ahead.
I think one of the things that I've noticed through a lot of the conversations is things were kind of percolating up. It makes me think of the big old 100-cup coffee percolator that they use in the big kitchen way back, where like it's like somebody plugged the cord in, 40, 50 years ago, and then suddenly it went from things being, well, I don't know that I like that about the denomination. I don't know about like that. And then people started saying, but what do we like? What are the things that we do stand for? And so you begin to see this kind of outgrowth of almost the churches looking towards something and then saying, we're going somewhere. Like we need something, and we need a banner to fall under, because I know that there's plenty of churches out there that have talked along the lines of, well, maybe we just kind of pull away from wherever we're at because things aren't really where we're at theologically or what we believe from a biblical standpoint, and we'll just go non-denominational. And in the end, when you do that, then there's nobody there in that covenant relationship with you except for the people that are sitting beside you. And sometimes that doesn't always work out great when you have a question that nobody knows the answer to in the room. And so this feels like the not to mix analogies, but the proverbial fruit of some of those conversations, that as things kind of moved forward over the years of, well, what's next for us, rather than spreading out and just letting the leaves blow wherever they may, that now something is coming together, and we're beginning to see the fruition of something new, which for me is exciting. And for many of us that are in Dakota classes, it feels very exciting. And we know that there's others around the area. So can you, maybe one other quick question before we get to some other stuff is, where are you seeing some of the momentum or people that are, the ARC is so brand new in just development of stuff, but where are you seeing people say, hey, we're interested in that, or we want to have a conversation, or maybe we're on board? Because if you come from an RCA background, we're not that big of a denomination that most people are going to go, oh, they're talking about it too. And I don't mean to out those people that are talking about it, but to let people know that this isn't just a really small group of people talking about things, that something new isn't something that doesn't have some momentum to it.
Yeah, I mean, we've had conversations on Zoom with 125 or 160 different leaders, really representing about that many churches, because usually a pastor or just an elder from each church. And those were information and interaction discussion forums over the last several months. And just a lot of people leaning in, saying this is needed, this time is now. And, so those are bigger circles. They're being communicated with, my own, since May 1, as we've gone into our public launch phase of this, where we can be completely transparent and open, it's good. And we have staff capacity. Dan is joining June 1 technically, but he's leaning ahead. He's volunteered a lot of hours in the last 6 weeks to help us move forward. But I just want to say it's coast to coast. I'm working with East Coast leaders and classes that have felt trapped in their situation and unable to break out. I worked for the RCA, remember, for 16 years trying to break, create a strong evangelical church planting movement on the East Coast among about 17 classes that just have a healthy classes. Now those churches feel that this is a way out and a way to be part of something that's much more healthy and fitting for them. And so there's conversations in New York area. There's conversations in Southern California, Central California, go to Central Iowa. I talked to the pastor last week, Friday, where, he's saying probably 15 out of the 18 of their churches are headed out of the Reformed Church at this point. And yeah, there will always be some churches that stay. We pray for them. It's going to be daunting for the churches that are called to stay in the RCA. We're thinking ahead to the implications of that. So, regional synods will have to help work with classes that have 1, 2, 3, 5, churches left over, and staying in the RCA and combine some of those classes. There's going to be some big changes coming for those called to stay by Christ in the RCA. But there are a lot of classes that are looking at the majority of their churches actually going somewhere. We don't know that they'll all go to the Alliance of Reformed Churches yet, because we're still new and fledgling, and we're getting a lot of things out in the next next few months. But there is a welcome packet. There's an opportunity to onboard. At this point, we can work into conversation with anybody. I'm willing to travel, meet with them by Zoom. I have about 120 leaders that I've spoken with in 3 weeks now that are very much leaning in and saying, what's our next step? What's possible? Getting their questions answered.
And, I think just to follow up on that, the Book of Church Order has the right question in it. When you start asking yourself, is any denomination, whether you're CRC, RCA, United Methodist, is that denomination helping us be as effective as we can be in our local setting to carry out the mission God's given us? That's really what the Book of Church Order asks. It says, if you want to move on to another community of churches to do ministry, the question that it asks you to answer in the RCA specifically, but I think we'd love every church to answer that, is how does, as you find out about the Alliance of Reformed Churches, how does that group empower you to be more effective to carry out the movement and mission that God has for you in your local community and globally with your connections, right? That's the question. So for me, a big chunk of this is not about, this thing's falling apart or that thing's falling apart. It's about, is there an invitation, like with every other church plant, to consider the opportunity to do some things, to experiment, to be innovative, to try some new things that will be different, fundamentally different organizationally, fundamentally different in how churches see themselves at the heart of their communities. Is that something you want to be a part of for a while? And there's still room and place for some of these other organizations that do it differently. We're just wondering whether some churches want to be invited along to try a new journey, a new pathway, a new structure that might empower them to do their mission more effectively. And so I said on Sunday to a church, I said, I'm not here to tell you to go anywhere. I'm here to say, this is what we'd love to build. Does this sound like a place that can empower you?
Yeah, I like that. That's actually researching when you go through and look through the BCO from an RCA standpoint, like the big question in a church transferring to a different denomination is this best for you in the ministry of the church? And then meeting with that other denomination saying, is this good for you guys too? Like that we're looking for something more and moving towards things. One of the things that you said in there that I think for some people will hear and go, oh, that's really good. And for other people will go, what does he mean by that? Was we may have some things that are fundamentally different. Can you poke at a few of those things or elaborate on that? Not to a huge extreme, but so that people that have been in their own church or denomination for years and years and years, as long as they can remember, whenever you say fundamentally different, for those folks might hear, well, how different? Because things aren't so bad right where we're at most of the time. And then for some people, like myself, I actually remember sleeping on Tim's couch when we went to a church planting conference. Like I came into ministry through a church plant. My wife was a part of one here in Sioux Falls that met the day after September 11th happened at the seminary here in town. And I was coaching high school wrestling in Iowa and moved up here and followed her. And she's like, we go to this church thing if you want to come. And there I met another person involved in all of this stuff that maybe we can have on the podcast at another time. But just through those relationships and connections, that those of us that have lived on the more innovative side of things, we go, oh, change isn't always a bad thing, that we all kind of change a bit as we move through and progress and process, especially as we've seen over the last COVID year, that who knew that grandma could figure out how to FaceTime or to Skype or to do Zoom, and you really can. Especially with churches even saying suddenly like, oh, you mean we have to broadcast on Facebook or on YouTube? How does that work? Like these things in some ways are a good thing. But Dan, can you maybe flesh that out just a little bit of what are some of those things that are different or might be a change moving forward in a way that some of the older generation might go, oh, that kind of scares me a little bit.
Yeah, so I'll poke at the top end, and then I'm going to say, hey, Tim, after I get done, why don't you poke at the kind of network end of churches spreading beyond just their like what we would consider a classist being all the same churches, but what does that mean for missional movement if we get beyond that into more of a network approach? So from the top end, we're imagining a board-directed organization, not an assembly-directed organization. So right now, I think we've learned from COVID that a couple things happen when we do assemblies. Number one, the more we don't know people, the more we don't trust the information, the more we end up doubting the outcome. And so if you look at assembly-based stuff, basically we used to kind of have a fabric within denominations that knew people. And so they could go to a large assembly, and sometimes they hung around for 2 weeks. So even if they didn't know people, they had time to build relationships and kind of build that fabric of the known. What's happened now is it's like the unknown has so overwhelmed the known that we really don't get things done. And when we do, we don't trust the outcome. Somebody doesn't trust it. They doubt it. So the way you flip that around a bit is to get to a smaller organization on the top that says, we're going to have a board. And I'm sorry, it's allergy season here a second, and I'm going to have to cough. So I'm going to mute myself here a sec. Thanks. Anyway, so on the top, there's this kind of organization desire to direct and to have a board of directors. How do the board of directors get there? We're imagining like a partnership team level in the RCA. It'd be kind of like a region, 30 to 60 folks. We might call it a collaborative. We haven't settled on a name, partnership team level, whatever. But those folks will place one person on the board. The board's idea is to set the parameters of directiveness, but they're doing it because they're listening to those partner teams. So when the partner team says, hey, this is going well, you should keep helping to empower our staff to keep going this direction, great. When the partner team says, no, this isn't going well, that person's going to sit on the board and say, this is of no value to us. Why are you doing it? And the board's going to say to Tim and myself, don't do that because it's of no value to our churches. So it's a different kind of collaborative. And then imagine a national meeting annually where everybody arrives on Thursday night who's coming. Friday morning, you have a worship time, a gathering, a celebration bit that opens. In the afternoon, that board of directors is there to listen to all the people who are there, puts them in small groups, say, what's going well? How are we empowering you? Where are we getting wins for God? Where is God leading us? And what things should we stay away from? Things we maybe tried that just didn't have any value, fell flat in your neighborhood, so to speak. And then on Saturday, we get together and we have a whole day of kind of learning, celebrating. What does it mean to do a church plant? What does it mean to have a safe church? What does it mean to do this? And Sunday morning, we get together and we have a commissioning of churches that are joining or becoming part of that. We have a commissioning of pastors who are re-upping things. And all of a sudden, we're all back home by Sunday night. It's been 3 days. We've gotten all the information we need, but we've also celebrated and told stories. And we kind of end up in this place where it's a different kind of relationship. We're together as friends, and the board is giving direction. And one of the reasons it works is because we're imagining a world in which churches re-up with the alliance. This is why it's an alliance. It's not a drafting process. It's an alliance of churches who voluntarily say every 5 years, yeah, this place has value for us. We want to be part of this. So on the 4th year, whatever team or collaborative you're a part of sits down and says to you, Ken, hey, how's it going? Does Alliance helping you do some things? Are we helping you? And hopefully your answer is, boy, I've really liked this. I wish we wouldn't do this as much. And we say, hey, Ken, we really love what you're doing. Do you want to sign up for another 5 years with the Alliance? And your leadership and you say, yep, we want to do that. So every 5 years, we got to have this ongoing conversation of evaluation. I even call it self-discipline about how's it going? How's our relationship going? I mean, what do we coach people in marriages, right? We don't tell them not to talk for 5 years. And then we say, look, you got to have a good communication pattern where you're always saying, hey, I'm in this relationship. I love this relationship. It loves me. We have to do the same thing with churches. So we're modeling our whole communication standard around a more relational character and less judicial.
Yeah, I like that. I think the big thing there is all of our churches are supposed to be asking the question, like, how are we doing at this? Like, are we really being active in our ministry and reaching people, or are we not? And most of the time within the RCA, then you get the little green sheet or whatever once a year, and you sort of fill it out, and then half of the leaders go, I don't even know what that is. So yeah, that sounds like, yeah, we did that and we did that. And then in the end, the question that is in there is like, we should be asking these questions. We should be asking them in a way that says, maybe things aren't going well. How can we help out? So not just along the lines of, do you like us all still, but is this beneficial? And then that helps keep us all accountable and moving forward. From my own background, from like personal training stuff and working out, you like somebody that says, hey, how can I help you? Or even the aspect of, you're not doing so well there, because it makes us all better. It helps move us all forward. So I think that's a good kind of, the leaner top is something that those of us in the RCA have longed for a long time, after living through a number of general synods and being a part of a number of the meetings before the meeting, where you go, what are we going to actually talk about? Because that's not the amendment that was proposed a year ago, or the recommendation that was proposed a year ago. And so I think that's really helpful. And the 5-year, hey, let's talk about this again, is good. Tim, what are you thinking from more the bottom side?
I want to pick up again where Jesus, began it all, right? He's the founder of his own gospel movement. He came from heaven, brought his world with him, announced the good news that the kingdom of heaven is at hand. He started healing the sick, driving out demons in the power of the Holy Spirit. He started training fishermen and tax collectors and zealots. I don't know if anybody's watching The Chosen. It's a really fascinating video series out right now, The Chosen, these early disciples that began to follow Jesus, and how amazing he is as a leader to this day, the most extraordinary leader on the planet, most powerful person and best, lover of our souls we could ever imagine. But Jesus, we want to see his leadership as resurrected king of his church really out front again. Mm-hmm. And so he taught us things in his own movement as he started it. It was much simpler in the beginning than we've made it. All right. So the first century church and the global church in the South, where they face persecution, economic deprivation, I'd say there's kind of 3 things we got to consider. We have to reduce the complexity, we have to reduce the controlling attitudes, and we have to reduce the costs of church in the North American context, or we'll never see an exponential movement of the gospel that impacts thousands and thousands of lives again, like Jesus did in the first century, his movement, and like the global South is experiencing now. They have a lot less budgets and buildings than we do, maybe even less Bibles and certainly less seminaries, and they are outrunning us by the 100-fold. They've rediscovered, the simplicity of the gospel in the leadership of Jesus actively. And so we want to build a much more relational, spiritual movement. So it's not about, systems and structures, but I want, I'll drop back into my team sport analogy, right? If you played basketball all the way to state championship, we shut down teams, that had high scoring players, 30, 40 points a game. My job was to stop them, keep them in single digits, right? And I learned a lesson as a senior in high school that I've never forgotten, that a powerful team can beat any individual any day. And I think we've been playing a lot of solo churches acting as kind of their own entity, and it's good. We want you to be empowered and strengthened, but if we can put you in a team of 5 or a team of 9, like think basketball to baseball team, just think about that from a sports analogy. Do all the players have the same abilities on a baseball team, on a basketball team? No, that's a surefire way to lose. So our God is so creative, so, innovative, that he actually brings out, 5-fold equipping leaders in Ephesians 4, all the diversity of the heart of Jesus. For us to capture the length and the breadth and the height and the depth of the love of God, we need to expand our diversity in our teams. Our equipping leaders need to represent more apostolic, prophetic, evangelist, shepherd, teacher. We need all of our churches being equipped more thoroughly, out of those ascension gifts. So that's part of what, can we build missional relational network that you name it, you build objectives. You've got teams of leaders from within your 5 to 9 churches in your area. So this is ecclesia, the church at the city level. You're affecting the kingdom on an area-wide level with a very strategic, powerful team. And you're supporting each other, you got each other's backs as churches. We want to see you play team ball, because you can win a lot more with a strong team approach than you can with an individual solo church and maybe a solo staff, solo pastor. A lot of those churches are struggling. I think rural America is fascinating to me right now. I've done some studies. I mean, we're running 70 to 80% non-church, de-church, or never been church. They don't have any relationship with Christ in our rural communities. It's a vast number of people that need to be brought to Christ. And there hasn't been a new church started in most of these, communities for 50 years or longer. So there might be a little Lutheran church and a Methodist church and maybe an RCA church in some of these communities, or CRC. And it actually doesn't, they've not been effective at reaching their neighbors. A whole new generation has moved in. And so creating a much stronger network around our, say, rural churches so that they can experience better equipping, better training, and see their mission reach a whole new level. We want to see a lot more people coming to Christ, being baptized and then being discipled. We want disciples that are making disciples. And a lot of our churches just don't have practical training in those areas. It wasn't coming to them through the seminary system, wasn't coming to them through, denominational structures. We need to rebuild the Jesus movement with the same principles that made it simpler but more powerful from the first century to the global church right now.
And just let me put that in practical terms. I grew up out west, so I'm a Pacific Northwest guy and Southern California guy growing up. And in some of the places where I lived, we were the only Reformed church, or at least the only church that had Reformed on the sign anywhere in town. And one of the things we're talking about is that historically denominations have said, hey, your best friends wherever you live are those folks with the same name on the sign. And we're saying when we build networks for churches, what we want you to be, so let's just say you're the only Alliance church in some town, and that's fine, but there are 3 other churches, a Bible church, a Pentecostal church, and a Methodist church, whatever, who are gospel-driven, who want to reach the community. And you say to us, this is really our heart network right here, because we support the local food bank together, we reach out to seasonal workers together in the summertime or whenever they're around, whatever that means, or we do this with the local public school. Our heart is to say, hey, that's your network. Tell us about it, right? I mean, we don't want to be a governance thing like most classes are. We want people to find a network that moves them into the mission of God in their locale. And so, again, to think network is to think not the structures we've had, but to think who around us is our friend in ministry that wants to share the gospel the way we want to share the gospel. So even on a structural level, when we get to the network level, we're imagining 5 or 6 churches, but we can imagine where there's maybe 2 Alliance churches networked with a local CRC, with a United Methodist, saying, we're going to reach this area. We're going to plant a church here in the name of Christ.
I think that's really good, especially for thinking from the context here in Dakota. So I'm in Sioux Falls, which is a pretty urban area for South Dakota anyway. And as we approach things, and we have a lot of churches here in town, but we also have a lot of rural congregations outside of this more kind of urban mindset with a whole bunch of churches around them. And so they don't have that same name on the door, although some areas do when you get into Reformed areas, but there are plenty that don't. And I think that's going to be a big one of if the ARC is saying, how can we help you within the group that you're a part of to be more effective, to be more intentional in ministry? Like, I think that's pretty attractive for many, especially over the last number of years that I've been listening to things, is a lot of the rural church ministers are like, hey, don't forget about us. We're out here and we're still doing ministry, and it's a little different than what it looks like in the city. But at the same time, we still have people that need Jesus. We still have people that you may have the old adage of, well, there's this many people in my town and they all go to church somewhere. Well, you think they do, but they don't always. And if they do, that doesn't mean that they go there just because mom and dad went there when they were kids. it might be one of those where they truly do need the gospel. They need that seed planted deep and need discipleship to foster. And so these sort of relationships, I think, will be really beneficial for some of those areas too. Gents, one of the things that I want to do is, rather than ask you specific questions of give you time, is, are there questions that you're hearing? So as you are out having conversations with leaders in churches, with congregants, with people that totally understand things and people that don't understand what's all going on, what are the questions that you're hearing that you think are really maybe ones that others will have, or things that are kind of, hey, this is an important thing to think about as you move forward?
Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, I'm trying to sift. I've had dozens of questions this week. It's a good question, Ken.
I mean, I think one of them, just to be upfront, is, what are we doing with pastors? How are pastors going to fit in? And the answer is, like in the RCA, CRC, we use the language pastor, ordained pastors, commissioned pastors. Those things will happen. As a young organization, I think we just have to set a bar that says it's unlikely we'll receive pastoral credentials until January of 2022. We need about 6 months here to kind of wrap our arms around this, because we're imagining, again, a structure with a ministry oversight team and that is overseeing pastors through these collaborative or partnership team level relationships. And what we hope is that if a pastor starts going in a direction that doesn't fit with our organizational convictions, that the partnership team or even their network will say, hey, what's going on? Let's talk relationally. But at the end of the game, at some point, if you've reached a point where you're at a situation where pastors are in a different place theologically than the Alliance, at some point, that's why you have these 5-year intervals to say, hey, we just shouldn't go down the journey much further. And so I'm hearing from pastors, how am I going to fit? The answer to that is, hey, we're going to have these offices. We will hold credentials. We will have some sort of national, what I would call banks of the riverbed. And so imagine that there's a river, and as long as you're in the river, you're in the river. But if you step up on the bank, you're not anymore. And so the banks will be, look, here's a way to figure out your local your local salary base. And pastors should be in that salary base around this quadrant of people, whether it's school administrators and masters of social work people, or however you do that. There ought to be health care for pastors. There ought to be a 403B contribution for pastors. There ought to be a long-term disability and a basic life. In many professions, 2 times your annual salary is about what is included in your package for a term life insurance. We're going to get there with those kinds of things, but it's going to take us a number of months to kind of get a finance team together to say, hey, how are we going to do that? I'm hearing from pastors saying, are you going to help us, stay in that river of reasonable pay, working hard ministry, not being, having to be just on my own with my consistory or elders saying, hey, this is what I should be paid. I hear that. I've heard that from, a number of folks. And I want to say, hey, we're doing that. And we're starting to even write out, hey, this is what we think we'll be headed for. But just to put a real time frame on it, credentials probably aren't going to arrive here until January of 2022.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's helpful, especially for some of the ministers that are kind of in process of asking the question. So if my church goes, then, and maybe you can answer this quickly, if my church decides to go ARC before I'm officially ARC, what does that relationship look like?
Yep. So for us, again, this is kind of thinking right now, organizationally being very young. Part of it is, you also have to realize, you're a young dude, but some of us have reached the ages where we look at ourselves at 60-ish, 61, 62, and we say, man, if I could just stay in the RCA about 3 or 4 more years, finish off that 403B I've got started in the RCA, and if a classis in the RCA will hold my credentials, should I ever move to the ARC? And my answer is, hey, those financial considerations are real. So let's talk about those things. And here's what we do want. We want you to commit to living under the organizational commitments of the RCA. And as long as you're under the organizational commitments of the RCA, you can pastor an RCA, as long as you're under the organizational commitments of the Alliance, you can pastor an Alliance church, even if your ordination stays either in the CRC or the RCA or wherever it happens to be. So, but we got to work those dynamics out. That's not something you can just say, oh, we're going to figure that out in 30 days.
I've had a lot of questions from the churches around how are we going to prevent the same kind of error and false teaching from creeping into the church again. I mean, our culture is powerful. It's a powerful, loud voice. It's a wealthy culture. It's a media-saturated culture. It's working on all 7 mountains of culture, in terms of education and business, and messaging is coming through government, and it's a very powerful call. And people are being led astray from the core teachings of Jesus and a sound life and doctrine built out of Orthodox Christianity, a deep holding to the truths of Scripture. Right? Scripture alone, not just reason and experience and culture and tradition and ritual and personal preference taking over, in the place of the special revelation of God, the God-breathed revelation of himself. And he's our creator. He's our maker, every human being. And we're made in his image, and we're made for him and by him and through him in Christ, right? Colossians 1. And so how do we actually, hold to God when our culture is getting less interested in that and really pulling hard? A lot of people are concerned about whether the Alliance of Reformed Churches can have a better defense, and as we've said too, a better offense, keeps the ball out of the enemy's hand. So we need strengthening on both sides of that. But how are we going to prevent error? How are we going to hold people accountable differently? There's a lot of holes in our current, more legalistic judicial process. It takes a lot of time in the Reformed Church anyway, and sets things up in a judicial way. And we're going to try to do much more relational, spiritual restoration. I mean, Jesus spoke again. We're going to follow our master. He spoke in Matthew 18 about how to deal with sin in the church. And here's the only sinless member of the church, the head, Jesus. And he speaks about how to deal with sin in Matthew 18. And the Spirit breathes out in Galatians 6, how those who are spiritual, led by the Spirit, coming from the spiritual perspective of the heavenly realms to bring resolution and reconciliation on earth where things get broken and torn up by sin. Those who are spiritual should restore others caught in the sin gently, guarding their own hearts in that situation. So we imagine that there can be something. We've had some early talks with leaders, like covenant keeper teams that are built out of the networks of 5 to 9 churches. Not every network, but maybe 2 to 3 networks have a covenant keeper team that's trained and well-versed and experienced in bringing healing, reconciliation, restoration to sinners. When we get a leader that gets caught in an error, stronger elders catching it early, dealing with it, but also bringing in a covenant keeper team if they can't resolve it locally, but doing that swiftly out of relationship, in context, knowing the persons, but really working with their heart, disciple the heart, get them before the Lord, praying with them and helping them. We try to resolve things quickly in relational and spiritual ways so that it doesn't grow and become a whole direction and doctrinal drift within a church. Mission drift and doctrine drift has been a big problem. So ultimately, there's like a national review board that can pull the credentials of an individual that refuses to learn and repent after they're being challenged and confronted in a Matthew 18, Galatians 6 kind of way. Yeah, then we can actually pull those leaders' credentials. And we're really saying it's a privilege to be on Team Jesus. If you're going to follow him, you're going to follow him. We're going to hold ourselves to higher accountability. Again, we want that if we're honest. It's not just when we profess our faith in Christ is the last time we name the fact that we're a sinner in need of a Savior. The fact is, church discipline as a third mark of the church continues that confession through our lifetime, that I'm a sinner in need of a Savior. And I'm not biased about the fact that I can drift into error. All parts of my life can be, tempted to be led astray. And so we have to hold one another closer to Christ. It's part of loving each other. God disciplines those he loves, Hebrews 12, right? And we have to, he's treating us like sons. We want to be part of a family, his family. We got to look for discipline and correction. in an athletic world, I had a coach all the time helping me improve, calling out what I couldn't see, or, helping train me in a certain way. It was important. It was important for my development. And we want to have a culture that receives and welcomes correction and direction, according to the scriptures, according to the Spirit's wisdom. But we also want to, be ready to help each other. If we're not spotting it, if something's in our own blind spot, then we have to have different strategies that are more, New Testament based in order to actually see real repentance occur, real restoration occur. So that's a big concern in our churches, how not to repeat the error in a strongly, diverse culture that's pulling in lots of different directions away from Scripture and Christ. How do we actually prevent error in life and doctrine in the future?
Yeah, I think it's important to remember, those of us from an RCA context, of the BCO as a whole section on discipline. And the point at the very beginning isn't to shame on you or to put a brother out, but to actually find a loving connection in relationship. And the goal is restoration, because we're all better in the end if we're following after Christ, if we are being discipled by the Master. That's an important thing that over the years we've just, I think some of it is through structure and some through getting bigger and broader within our context, that some of that stuff gets lost. Dan, you were going to add something there?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think discipline is such a different word. When I was a younger kid, the corporal punishment, I have a history. I can remember being spanked by a school teacher, right? Going back. Those things don't happen today, right? Discipline changed.
Oh, I grew up in the South, so living in the South, I caught a whooping a few times from the principal. You caught a
whooping, yes, you did.
Yeah.
And,
I'm sure you both deserved it. You both earned it, I'm sure.
It was in love.
I don't deny that at all. But at the end of the day, one of the things, as I raise my own children in today's context, you recognize that this whole idea of sitting on the naughty chair and having your child take a time out and then sitting with them and processing what just went wrong between us, what happened, right? Or for them to come home and say, hey, how does this work? And I remember getting to high school with one of my kids, and she was heading out or he was heading out, and it was like, hey, do you need a curfew tonight? And she looked at me, or I think it was one of my two daughters. She looked at me, what do you mean? I said, well, my only question about the curfew is not when you're going to get home, but do you need a curfew so you can say to the group you're with, I have to be home by this time, so I'm the bad guy. And we had this conversation about, I trusted her judgment. I didn't think there would be any problems, but sometimes it's just happy to have, my dad says I have to be home by this time, because then I'm the bad guy, right? And she just kind of looked at me, and we talked about that for a while. And really, that's what discipline is. It's a self-discipline thing. It's a growing into each other that says in a mature conversation, I can be corrective of her and she can be corrective of me. Sometimes she's like, Dad, you're being too stubborn about this, right? And she's right. And so we live in a world that has become that kind of disciplining world. But I think a lot of church structures are still the corporal punishment world. They want to file charges. They want to, they got to have a trial. They got to have all this stuff. And you're right, Ken, the book says that, but that's not generally how it gets played out, because we don't have enough of a relationship. And when we don't have a relationship, we resort to rules and laws, both to protect ourselves and to try to prosecute others. And when we start saying, oh, the law is where we start, or the rules are where we start, we're in real trouble, because we're relational people. So again, our desire is to build a relational fabric up through that allows people to have those conversations that say, hey, you should be home a little earlier. Well, I think you're being a little too stubborn. Let's talk about that. Where is that line? But ultimately, we both know we want to do this for the safety of the other person in real life.
So if I can kind of boil some of this down, the question started with, so an average congregate would say, well, how do we keep from getting ourselves to this point 4, 5, 10, 15 years down the road? And the ARC's answer is, we need some communication, some networking, some conversations that happen locally, some things where we're keeping each other accountable as we move through this process, rather than just kind of, well, we'll wait until things get real bad and then we'll bring formal charges. That this is really based within a relational network, that there is interaction taking place for the betterment of everybody, so that you don't get years down the road and go, oh, how did we not know that that was going on? Or see things on Not the Bee and you go, I went to seminary with that person. How is this possible? Like, and so I think that's a good thing. So for the average congregant, they're looking, they're saying, how do we prevent having this same ARC 2.0 10 years down the road? And the answer to that is, we're going to continue the conversation locally and within a larger group, and not let things get so far spun out of control that then we have factions and stuff going on. Is that fair to say?
Yep. And I think it's fair to say that part of this 5-year renewal process for congregations, and a 5-year renewal process for pastoral credentials. So every 5 years, you got to renew your pastoral credentials. We have to have a conversation about whether we're still on the same train together. And if we're not, it's a conversation of, I think you're being, sometimes with kids get to a point where they say, hey, I can't live with this anymore, mom and dad. And mom and dad say, well, you got an option. You can live with it here, or you can move out on your own. And it doesn't mean they hate each other when they're done. They're just saying, this is not a good road for us to be on anymore. And that's why we're putting in these 5-year increments, because we want to force that congregation, or force the conversation, not just hope it happens.
Mm-hmm. Not to live in the Midwestern, or maybe, I don't know if it's a church thing or a Midwestern thing. We get it here in South Dakota of, it's just easier to not talk about things, and so you don't until you have to talk about them, and then it becomes an issue. Quick personal story here. So I'm at First Reformed in Sioux Falls, and when I first came on board, I was in the microchurch, house church planting world, and first said, hey, can we partner with each other, and you bring a little bit of that here, and we bring a little bit of structure and stability and a kind of a parenting role. And as that conversation went, the leader said, how about we do like 6 months and reevaluate, because, maybe you won't like us, and maybe we won't like you, and the fit won't be real great. And I used that conversation in a sermon a couple of years ago, and one of the congregants came up to me afterwards, and she said, Pastor Ken, sometimes like turns to love. And you go, yeah, we always think of these sort of conversations of, well, after a few months, maybe it's not a good fit. Or maybe you get to that and you go, this is a really good fit. We have been doing really good work. Things are really moving forward. And that it's not a bad thing to have those conversations, that they really are beneficial. Before we run out of time, are there a few other of those questions that people are asking out there that you think need to be touched on, that the average person sitting in the church or watching this on YouTube right now goes, I've really been wondering, they're going to answer my question?
I think one of the questions I get too is probably the one about, why did you choose to do certain things with, like, either the confessions or the nature and extent of who's in office at a local church? And again, the case being for us, when we looked at confessions, we made a definition of confession that it had to include the full gospel to be a confession. There are lots of statements that don't include the full gospel. Who is God? How do we sin? How do we get salvation from sin? How do we live in response to that, right? That's the full gospel. And so we went to this place of saying, we're willing to live with confessions that inform and help us shape our lives, but we want to make sure the confessions say the whole gospel. And then there are other things we would add as appendices, like specific things, like the Belhar addresses a specific thing, unity and how we treat one another and don't discriminate. And the Great Lakes Catechism talks about a specific thing, human sexuality. I can imagine in the next couple of years, we're going to need a statement, and we're going to want to go back and write a whole confession about who is God, but we're going to need a statement on technology. How do we affirm that technology is useful, but doesn't dehumanize us? Because it does dehumanize us if we're not careful. Maybe we're going to have a statement about designer babies. We think statements are going to be more necessary, not less necessary. So we chose the appendices route under existing broader confessions that tell the whole story of God. The second thing people ask is nature and extent of women serving in the ordained offices. And our answer was, we went to the local bodies. We believe strongly that you can make a strong case that exegetical principles used standard ways in Reformed practices lead you down to certain things. I mean, in the Bible, there appears to be a gift-based approach to leading the church. Gift ministries don't come with male and female pronouns. And then there seem to be a few books like Timothy and Philemon and Titus that say, no, there's role-based leadership to the church. So maybe it's a church thing. And then we say, well, then it's a wisdom thing. But in both cases, we affirm that God gifts men and women to lead the church, because they do. And in every church I've been in, whether it's more of a gift-based or a role-based type church, some people would call the gifts-based egalitarian, some would call it role-based complementarian. But either one of those, I've seen women lead the church in both of those situations. I've seen men lead the church in both of those situations. So part of it is to say to the church, stay healthy in your conversation around that, but don't disdain the work of God in giving gifts to people. And so we're trying to stay in this place, and we're going to say to everybody, while you're in meetings where there are men and women gathered, you honor everyone with the dignity that God has given them as a child of God. So our confrontation or our conversation will be with anybody who demeans the dignity of another person in any way.
That's good, Dan. I think another question that's come up is, do you need money? How are you funding this thing? Like, you have 2 full-time staff. They're a little surprised, like, where's this coming from? You don't have any assessments, right? And we don't. And so we are raising some of those funds out of the gate here for our 18-month launch period. We hope to, while churches are still wrapping up their commitments to the RCA, we want them to do that, to give their full amount of assessments and finish that out, because it's about an 18-month delay on the billing cycle of assessments. That we're going to try to raise all the funds for this year's budget, next year's budget, for our national staff. That's Dan and I, with a couple contract partners, and maybe be an admin person along the way here. But we're just very, very lean and very nimble at this point. We're talking maybe for the partial year, 261,000 or something is our budget. It's a little bit in flux all the time, but it's not that big of a number, and we're raising those funds. We got 50 grand already in, another 200,000 or so pledged, and we're working on hitting those numbers. But so we're trying to be gracious to our churches that are in transition, that they're not going to have to fund the launch phase of this. Now, as we get into collaboratives, that's the 30 to 60 churches. The name I'm using, they're gonna have leaders that are both half funded by the alliance itself, so that we keep good alignment through the whole system, and half funded by the churches that are members of that alliance. So 30 to 60 churches. You might have 3 to 5 staffing leaders in a particular area of leadership to help, again, equip the local churches, strengthen pastors that need additional support and leadership and, strategies. And so, we're looking at a pretty lean, agile organization, and eventually churches will help kick into that. Let's just say 1.5%, 2% down the line of their total income, probably to help fund the movement going forward. But it's still going to stay a small staff, and most of all the staff is going to be much closer to them in terms of where we put the leadership, within their own missional networks, within their own collaboratives. And so that's a question that comes up quite often.
And I think one of the things that you poke at within that too is that a lot of the leadership and the structure here seems to be more grassroots level, like local connections with, like, for example, Dakota has a classis pastor that is connected to the regional synod, but also funded through the local churches here. And so we have a specific connection with a specific person that we all have relationship with. And so some of these things aren't brand new for many of us, but also just reassuring that this is you in your congregation with the people around you working together to move forward within the ARC, and not the ARC saying, give us some money. It's no, we're going out like missionaries and we're going to raise some support. We believe in this. And I think the huge spin here that some people wouldn't hear is there are people and churches and areas that are saying, we believe in you. Like that's the side that many don't grasp onto. They hear, well, what am I going to have to pay? When the stronger part is there are people saying, we want to bless this because there is fruit here. There is something. The Spirit is moving. Let me give you a check. Let me help this happen in a more expedient way. So I think that's really reassuring for some of the churches that are kind of wondering, like, what does that kind of look like?
Yeah.
I know that we're getting kind of towards a time crunch, and maybe what we can do at some point, maybe a couple weeks or a month down the road, as more churches start having questions, we can do like a round 2 here with a few more Q&A type of things. But let's leave with this of, where can people go for info? Or you mentioned earlier that there's kind of a welcome packet. What is the process to get some of that stuff? Or just where is more information available if people are looking?
Right. So arc21.org, ARC21, Think Alliance of Reformed Churches for the 21st Century. So arc21.org is our website and available. And right now, we are aiming for an update. We're kind of targeting June 1, but it's the day after Memorial Day, so there may be a lag of a day. But there will be a welcome packet available by clicking onto the website at that point. We're just going through some documents, final drafts today. We're going to get them out there. I'd love to have them up a little bit before June 1, but that's kind of our target time. The welcome packet's going to be about 6 or 7 documents, going to have a welcome letter, going to have kind of a process piece of how you become a partner with the ARC. It'll have a piece of, hey, here's our organizational values. Here's what you have to affirm. Here's our, if you're going to join with us, and here's a view of our church and why we think we want to join the ARC. And then a final page that has some of that information about pastors that I shared earlier. So that packet, again, June 1, probably out more on the webpage. The other thing we're working on the webpage is to be able to give online. So if you feel called to give us a few bucks so that Tim can buy a meal while he's on the road, we want that to happen and make it easy for you. So we'll be working on that. At any moment you can send a note to us at the contact page there, and it comes through our webmaster to Tim and myself saying, hey, I want to know about this. This is what I'm interested in. We just got another one today, a number yesterday. And then we figure out who's going to respond to those things.
So then ARC21, and that's 21 as in the numbers.org.
Yes. Yep.
And then most of the info will be there. Click on the contact section, and to be looking for a welcome packet. That if you've made it this far in the podcast, thank you. I think when that welcome packet comes out, I'll probably do another video on that, just to kind of walk people through some of the practical things where you go, I don't even know what that word means right now. Gents, thank you. This has been helpful for me specifically, and hopefully for people that are kind of tuning in. Any last words that you want to say?
They're all yours, Tim.
We really love Jesus, and we really love the church, and we want to be your partner. We want to bless you. We want to strengthen you. We want to carry the burden that you're carrying in this generation. And we think your church can be dynamically different. And we want to be part of a new generation and a new wineskin. And God's going to do mighty things. I'm excited. It's been a big change for Dan and I both, but we are excited to be on your team and on your behalf for Christ.
Well, for those of us that are out here kind of watching everything go on and not seeing the behind the scenes stuff, I just want to say thank you for the time, the effort, all of the extra stuff that is involved. I mean, everybody knows that this stuff doesn't just we don't suddenly get a new denomination out of nowhere, that there are plenty of meetings and conversations and time away from family and stuff that's gone on, and especially stepping out in faith saying, let's invest in this something new. I really believe that. And that means stepping away from other things within the Zealand world and within the RCA world and moving into the new thing. And so I just want to say thank you from those of us that kind of watch along the sidelines with active interest, that aren't plugged into some of the finer details, that still know that there's a lot of stuff that goes on. And a lot of meetings that happen. And so thank you to you and your families and everybody that kind of helped make this happen. And for anybody else watching, stay tuned. We'll let you know if there's something else that comes along the way, as far as another Q&A with these guys or with some of the other leaders or some other churches that are making some decisions moving forward. But I think that's it. Gents, thank you.
Thanks, Ken.
Bless you, brother.
Blessings on the day, and hopefully talk soon.
Peace out.
Okay, we're back. That was a great conversation. That was a good time to hear their heart. You can see the balance between Tim's heart and passion for the gospel and the discipling narrative of, hey, we got to be people that are about this business of reaching people and training up and having a change within us so that we can see Jesus advance within our world, that we can see the gospel move within our hearts and our minds and our friends and our family and the people around us, that is the driving vision there. And then you can also see the great balance of me as a person that does kind of get into the nuts and bolts and can be a bit deconstructionist at times. A great thing is between the vision piece and then the piece that Dan brings of, hey, I got a question about all of these particular details, and him being able to look through some of that stuff and have a kind of push, especially when you think along the lines of, this is a brand new denomination. And while a lot of the stuff is a simple kind of, hey, how do we refine some of those things from what we've known to make it a little more user friendly or more practical for today. But for him to be on board, for both of them to be on board is huge. So big thank you to Dan and to Tim for taking the time and giving the opportunity to have a conversation. We will hopefully get another one in the near future, maybe within the next month or so, as they kind of move out and start talking to more people and more churches begin to have more conversations around here. I will tell you, there's bubbles up here at some point that you can click on that'll give you some of the past info where I've went through some of the things that are a struggle within the RCA and some of the reasons of why would the ARC move forward. There's even a link in there for the ARC organizational documents from I don't know if it's the most recent edit, and I think they just adjusted some grammar stuff, but we want to give you, we as in all of us that are kind of around here going, hey, we're trying to figure this out together. So me as a minister and me at First Reformed here in Sioux Falls, we're trying to say we don't really know exactly what's going on either. And so how do we navigate these waters together? And so hopefully this has been beneficial. If it has, hit the button down below and the bell, subscribe, and some of those things so you can get more info as that comes available. But the big thing for now is know that there is stuff coming. And so if you are a person in a congregation, if you're a minister and you're wondering kind of where things are at, we will get more information as it comes, or at least as I hear more information, I will disseminate that to you. And as Tim and Dan and some of the other leadership within the ARC, as that stuff kind of moves forward, then I will continue to kind of give some info there. So stay tuned to that. I think we have climbed the labyrinth a little bit further. Until next time.